So my name's Bruce Leverett, and I'm a member of the Pittsburgh Chess Club. I was the club champion in 1993 and 2004, and I won the Midwest Masters in Chicago in 1985, and I'm gonna show off a couple of my games. One of them is, I thought it was kind of nice, but it's a little, it's not on it, but it's not real sacrificial or wild and hairy. The other one is sacrificial and wild and hairy, but it's kind of embarrassing because I got a more or less losing position, but I bamboozled my opponent with complications. And I'll first say a little bit about my early years in chess, which are I learned how to play chess in 1962, and my family moved to Pittsburgh in '64, and so I've been acquainted with Pittsburgh chess since I was 12 years old, and I graduated from high school and went off to college in '69 and came back for graduate school in '73, and I've been back in Pittsburgh since then. What I like to talk about my early years was that what was unique about the '60s and the '70s is that it was the Bobby Fischer era. And some of you don't need to be told about that, but if you weren't there, it's hard to believe what it was like. Let me give you an idea with just some numbers how different it was from today. Some of you have played in the Golden Triangle Open or the Gateway Open. These are like Pittsburgh chess standards. We've held them for 50 or more years, 60 years maybe, every year. Well, in 1968, the Golden Triangle had 90 entries. In 1967, the Golden Triangle had 94 entries. One of them was Walter Brown, and one of them was Donald Byrne. Now, Walter Brown, you've probably heard of him. He was the U.S. champion six times. At the 1967 Golden Triangle, he was just a teenager, an 18-year-old, and not yet a grandmaster, but he won the tournament. And Donald Byrne was a Penn State professor who was a regular player in the U.S. championships. He was not a grandmaster, but he was probably an international master. So so those were 90 players one year and 94 players the previous year. In 1967, the Gateway Open had 75 players, including Donald Byrne. And in 1967, there was a tournament in Oakland at the YMWHA, Young Men and Women Hebrew Association. And it had 56 players, including a guy named Ken Rogoff, who went on to be a grandmaster and a world famous economist. And Ken Rogoff too was just a teenager at the time. So tournaments got to be huge in those days because, well, Bobby Fischer won the U.S. championship in 1958 when he was 14 years old, and almost immediately everybody knew who Bobby Fischer was, and he became a world championship contender, and he won the championship in '72. And as recently as '74, there was a tournament in Pittsburgh called the Allegheny Chess Congress that drew more than 100 players. So another feature of the Fischer era was that there was a lot of separate scholastic events got their start back then. well, I shouldn't say they got their start, because there was already I know that there was a Pittsburgh high school league in the 1930s, but um, the Pittsburgh high school league that I attended had 30 teams in the 1968-69 school year. And these days we're lucky if the Pittsburgh high school league has 10 teams. The Gateway and the Golden Triangle back then were tournaments were marathons back then. You would expect 3 games on Saturday and 2 games on Sunday. And the reason they couldn't hold all 5 of them on the same day was because the time controls were something like 50 moves in 2 hours, or for each side, or 50 and 2 followed by 20 and 1 followed by whatever. And both players and directors were up all day long. But people wanted that because they wanted to get better. You know, it was like total immersion in chess. That's, you just you played games with your buddies on the floor when you weren't playing around. So in 69 I went to college, and in 72, when Fischer was about to contest his world championship match with Spassky, I had a summer job on campus, and I would walk around campus or around the town, and I would hear, well, a popular song. A song became popular back then, and I kind of liked the tune, and it was a while before I realized that hey, wait a second, they're talking about chess in this tune. I'm gonna okay, you got the flavor of it. I didn't, for those of you who I didn't, not too keen on all that 48-year-old music. I understand, but it was amazing to me. Of course, they're talking, the lyrics are about chess, but they aren't about chess the way chess players talk about chess. It's more like poetical chess, but you get used to it. Let's see, I came back to Pittsburgh for graduate school, and around 1981, I finished graduate school, and I got a FIDE rating. This was back in the day when you only got a FIDE rating if you were rated, if your FIDE rating was only published if it was 2200. And so organizers around the country and around the world who wanted FIDE ratings for their for their hometown players, they had to find other FIDE rated players for those guys to play. And I got an invitation to spend a month in Hong Kong playing 2 9-round tournaments. I think they were 9 rounds, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe they were 11 rounds. In it, so that some Hong Kong players would get FIDE ratings. And one of the first game I'm going to show off is my game with the leading player of Hong Kong, the then leading player of Hong Kong, a guy named Wai Shui Khan, who was, when he got a FIDE rating, it was about 2340 or 2370, I forget which. So it was like the leading player of Hong Kong versus the leading player of Pittsburgh. Big matchup. There were 2 other Americans there, by the way, and of course quite a few. The rest of the players were from Hong Kong. And okay, and in the second of the 2 tournaments, Khan was leading the tournament, and I was a point behind him. And I met him in the last round. And if I wanted to catch up to him, I would have to win. But we'll start showing it off here. I didn't think I knew that I would get at least a chance to win because I knew what I had been watching him all month, and I saw that he would play moves like f4, and he used to win with that. But at least it led to unsymmetrical positions where both sides could get chances. And so here we go. Let's see. Now this particular version. All right. So
we can't see your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to share a screen. Un moment. How silly. How did I forget that? All right. Let me go get backwards then, since I deprived you of the first few moves of the game. Okay, this is the bird's opening, f4. And as I said, I knew that this would lead to an unsymmetrical game with winning chances for both sides. Now, if white is going to fianchetto his bishop, if he's going to place his bishop on g2 as he does here, then that's a, well, it's the way we're playing it, it's like the Dutch defense with colors reversed, and if white is going to fianchetto his bishop, then it's a particular variation of the Dutch defense, called the Leningrad variation with colors reversed. And when I saw that was coming, and I sort of anticipated that would be coming because I'd seen his previous games, I decided to play something unusual, which was e6, and we'll see in a moment what I'm doing. Okay, so he can't castle now because my bishop cuts across his king's field. Or now there's three ways he can deal with this, because of course everybody wants to castle. One of them is would be the provocative, or bishop c5 is provocative because white can immediately chase the bishop. Okay, and of course I would retreat the bishop, and we would be back in a different. We would be out of the usual sort of Leningrad opening variations, because in the Leningrad, usually by the time black fianchettos his bishop, white has already committed to fianchettoing his own bishop. This would be offbeat, but it would be satisfactory to me and probably satisfactory to him too. But let's back out of that. Another possible way of handling this would be for white to prepare to castle queenside, but he didn't really like that, so he played e3. Okay, so now we're both playing normal developing moves, and so we've got all our pieces out, and both sides have kept the option of castling on either side, but somebody has to make up their mind first now. Now this is a strange looking move. And it's ugly, and I don't really know what he had in mind here. Probably he wanted to put his knight on f2 and follow up with an advance like g4 and g5. I don't know, but I think that perhaps he should have considered playing a3. And the virtue of that is that it prevents my next move. It prevents me from playing bishop to a3. But let's continue with the game here. So what's nice about bishop to a3 is that I didn't know what to do with that bishop. It wasn't doing a lot useful. And his bishop on b2 is obviously very aggressively posted. So I should be happy here. Let's see. So a few more moves before I actually have to say something about what's happening. Now I played a funny looking move, but the purpose of this move is to support my next move, bishop to a6. I don't really have a plan I don't really have a plan. I'm just sort of trying to place each piece on a better square, one at a time. Once again, that ugly move with knight d1, and okay, finally I get going here. I get a little bit of pressure on the e file. I'm sort of threatening pawn takes pawn, and now he can't play e pawn takes pawn because that's pinned on his queen. And if he plays g pawn takes pawn, well then I have a half open file against his e pawn. So I kind of like that. Now he could probably on the other hand, he could probably handle that. He could, for instance, sidle his queen over to d2 and so on. But he chose to meet me head on here. Okay. Now I played okay, now he can't recapture with his d pawn because it's pinned on his queen. So he does the logical thing. Okay, so once again here, he could play knight takes knight check, and I could play queen takes knight, and then he could sidle his queen over to d2, and he would have a somewhat not very exciting position, but both sides could be making plans. So okay, an alternative here was queen takes knight, and he may not. It looks as though he shouldn't do this because I can play check, and if he moves his king, then I capture his queen. But instead, he can do this, and now I'm the one who's in a dilemma because he's attacking my rook on e8 with his queen. In other words, if I just retreat queen to d6, then queen takes rook, and I can't even recapture because I get queen takes rook, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, check, queen to f8, rook takes queen, king takes rook, and whoops, white is a whole rook ahead. So so if he did play queen takes knight, I would have had to I would have played this, and it's sort of once again it's sort of a it's sort of an even game. So instead he retook with his bishop. Now things are just starting to get tricky here. And he understands that he shouldn't have his bishop pinned against his queen. So he sidles his queen over here. And now he's threatening bishop to c6. So I prevent it, and I don't like that because it would keep me from doubling rooks on the e file. So I prevented it, sorry, this way. And he plays king h1 to prevent checks by queen to d4. Now it's a little, yeah, and what he should probably do at this point is he should also move his rook, because for instance, if he plays bishop to f3 now, then that's keeping his rook from, his pawn from being defended by my against my queen. So I trade rooks and I take his pawn. Well, that's unfortunate. So what else can he do with his bishop? So he should probably, well, to avoid that, he should either get his pawn off that that sensitive square, or get his rook off the e file, but either one of those would reduce the possibility of nasty accidents. But he was still concentrating on having a harmonious looking position. So let's see. He played queen g5, probably thinking that, well, if I traded queens, he would have an advanced pawn on g5 that would keep him out of trouble. But now in fact he gets real problems. Now if he moves his rook, then he has to work. Then what I can do is this: bishop takes rook, rook takes bishop, and I win a whole pawn for nothing. So so he has to be very careful, and there's no other way to unpin the bishop, at least not right now. So suppose he plays rook to g1, then I can even think about bishop to c6. However, that doesn't work for me yet, because bishop takes bishop, rook takes rook, and I'm the exchange up, but he gets the exchange back this way. So this is this is not so exciting. But it's what he should have played, because instead he got the idea of I don't know if he was going to try to double his rooks on the file, or well, I guess he thought he was safe here. But now I have a and it does look, it looks reasonably safe for him, because, for instance, if I try bishop takes bishop check, rook takes bishop, after any number of exchanges, he can bring his king out, he can bring his king forward and defend everything over here, and essentially the game is drawn, and he's happy. But I have a way to, but I have a sly tactical, I have a sly tactic here, which I'll give you a moment to look for it. Oh, okay. Okay, I can't play f5 because of pawn takes pawn. And then after I recapture the pawn, he can move his king, and there's no longer, then I really do have to capture the pawn, the bishop, or, you know, his bishop is no longer, he can retreat his bishop here, or he can play bishop here, check, and I might even lose material there if I let him get something like that. So let's go backwards. So instead, I can play this h6. So the idea being that if he plays pawn takes pawn, whoops, sorry, pawn takes pawn, I play f5, okay? And if bishop to d5 check, then bishop takes d5 is check. So he doesn't have time to capture my rook. He has to move his king. Likewise, if bishop to f3 to try to guard this rook, then I play bishop takes bishop check. So f5 just wins. And okay. And the unfortunate part is if he plays h4, which is the natural way to defend that pawn. Let's follow this for a few moves. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes bishop check, pawn takes bishop. Now if I play rook here, then he plays pawn here, and if I capture his pawn, I have an extra pawn, but how much is it really worth? Because it's doubled, and you know he can plop his king or his rooks down in front of it, and so I really don't have what I want in this position. But what I can do is play king h7, and now he doesn't have he doesn't have a useful move. I'm just going to come around and envelop his pawn, and he can play something like c4 with the idea that if I take the pawn, then rook takes pawn, rook to g1 check, and if I come back to defend my h pawn, then I got mated. Well, yeah, that's right, but instead of capturing his pawn, I just sort of, I put one rook here to blockade his pawn, and then on my next move, I play my other rook here, check. Let's see if the chess.com will allow me to do that. Okay, it won't allow me to do that because it thinks it's black's move. But anyway, rook to here, and then rook to here, and then I just capture capture the G pawn, and I don't have to pay for it. So he realized he was going to lose material. So we go back to the game position. He realized he was going to lose material, and so he decided that the best way to lose it was, the best way to hang in there for a while was to unpin his bishop. So well, all right, rook to e5 is kind of a mistake. The right way to play this position strategically is to keep your rook active. Put your rook on open files and diagonal, or open files, and if you want to blockade a piece, like black would like to blockade this pawn so that white can't come down here, and white can't bring the pawn forward and force black to capture it and get back down to the two doubled points scenario. So black should bring his king up in front of the pawn right away, and then move his rook to aggressive open files when that's later. But this was back in 1981, and I didn't know as much about rook and pawn endgames as I knew later. So I stuck my rook in front of his pawn, and the resulting positions sometimes look strange, but oh, and of course I should play f6 here. I didn't think of that till next move. If I had played f6 earlier, I could have then followed up with king to move my rook to f7. Move my king to f7 in one move. But like I said, I didn't think of that.
Oh, there was a question to go back to the f5 position.
Yes. The f5 position.
I think.
Let's see if I can. Okay.
It's when you played h6.
Oh, all right. We will go there. Yes. Right. I can't see the chat here, so thank you for telling me what the guy's question is.
Yeah, this is William's question. William, if you wanted me to unmute you, just let me know. I can. Might be easier than typing in questions in the chat.
Oh yes. Would bishop c6 be any good here?
Let's. Now, he can take my rook, but then I take his rook with check, and then I come back and take his bishop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to, where were we? Oh, this is nice. I can just hop back to where we were if I can find it. So let's see. I didn't like the idea of white coming over here and getting his rook down among my pieces. So I shoved my pawn forward to keep that from happening. But that's awkward because the only thing I can defend my pawn with is my rook. So he plays rook g3, and so instead of defending the pawn, I put my rook here. So at least I'm getting a little bit of the right idea here by keeping my rook active rather than having my rook defending things or blockading things. I don't know why I played g5 here. It's a strange looking move. I guess because I want to move. Bring my king up here, and so I don't want to leave that pawn undefended on g7. Okay. Now, I don't know why he didn't play king to g1 here, because with his king defending his pawn, then his rook is free to go other places. Now, I still have I will still take care of this because my rook is so active, but it's better looking than king f1. So I don't want him to, I don't want to wobble back and forth with my king while he goes back and forth with his rook. So I'm the one that has to do something different here. And maybe just rook to d4 would have been the normal way to proceed, but I guess then he would play rook back here. So I chose, the way I chose was to start advancing my kingside pawns. Oops, I'm sorry, I have to press the right arrow button here. Okay, so he wins a pawn, but I win a pawn. And also now his pawn is pinned on his king. So he checked for a while. I'm sorry. I meant to comment on this. He could even play rook takes pawn here. He could play rook takes pawn here. Now, if I play rook takes pawn check, that wins, but there's still some fight left because he still has a rook. So what I would have done was just capture his rook and go chase his pawn. And he can't do anything over on the queen side. Sorry, he can't do anything over on the king side. So he just can move back and forth while I go chomp on the a pawn, and then I come back and start pushing a pass pawn to queen. So he kept his rook on board for a while longer, but it's really hopeless at this point, so he resigned. So I'll pause for a moment. Oh, what time is it? It's 8:14. Okay, I'm doing okay. Anyone have any questions about what you've heard so far? So there was something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the Fisher era, but it didn't really show until about now. I was in Hong Kong in 1981. Around the late 70s and the 80s, we started to see the end results of the Fisher era, because Fisher was no longer the world champion, and sort of the fuss had died down. But we had a lot of strong players. We had a lot more people playing tournament chess, and a lot more people means a lot more masters. Now, if you're familiar with the Pittsburgh chess scene or with the United States chess scene, you might have heard some of these names. Paul Cornelius, Bill Hughes, Bill Dempler, Tom Magar, Tom Martinak, Mark Idemiller, and the late Charlie Now. Those guys were all masters, or in the case of Idemiller, a senior master, and they all were like me. They all were Fisher babies. They learned how to, they were growing up and learning the game when Bobby Fischer was popular, and like me, they didn't necessarily feel any kind of hero worship, I mean, but or even admiration, but when everybody is playing chess, you get more chances to play chess, and you get more chances to improve your game, and you can get better, and they did. It's hard to there's hardly been an era when that many strong players grew up in the Pittsburgh area. Nowadays, there's more chess available for young kids. You have tournaments in the area. Well, I forgot to mention Jerry Myers, who he didn't grow up in Pittsburgh, but he's another Fisher baby, and he now teaches lessons for kids, and he's held tournaments for kids in the Pittsburgh area. So nowadays you can go, you can even elementary school kids can play in tournaments, for scholastic tournaments for kids their own age. The very first national high school championship was in 1969. So there's actually more people playing chess now than there was then, but they're kids. It ain't the same. Now, after that Hong Kong tournament, actually I did quite a lot of traveling playing chess, but eventually I had to settle down and get a job, and sort of what I thought was going to be my farewell to serious chess was the 1985 Midwest Masters in Chicago, but I won that tournament by beating a grandmaster in the last round, and so all of a sudden I had to keep up my play in the 80s. Oh, and during my year after graduate school of traveling around playing chess, I wrote a book. I wrote a chess book an opening book about the Sicilian defense, Velimirovich attack, which unfortunately I didn't bring with me because I couldn't find my copy, so I can't show it up to the screen. But that led to an opportunity to contribute to Modern Chess Openings, 13th edition. I'm sorry, it looks backwards. Zoom shows things backwards, but that says Modern Chess Openings. The name down here is Walter Korn, but the guy who did most of the work the editorial work was Nick DeFermian, and he let some lesser players like me contribute sections. Like I contributed the section on the English opening with him editing, and then 10 years later I got to contribute to Modern Chess Openings 14th edition. And nowadays there's a 15th edition, and I didn't contribute to that, but probably parts of it were still left over from the 13th and 14th editions. I played in several more Midwest Masters tournaments after that one in 1985, and in 1989 1988, I played a game against John Donaldson. Now, I'm sorry, something's happening.
Sorry, that was Melly just joined, and something's wrong with his audio.
Thank you, dear. My wife found my copy of Sicilian Defense Velimirovich Attack. This was published right here in Pittsburgh by a guy named Bob Dudley, who who published a lot of little paperback books. About chess. He's retired by now. But that was my chance to write an actual chess monograph. Well, let's see. Oh, I was talking about John Donaldson. Nowadays, Donaldson is when there's a chess Olympiad every 2 years. Donaldson is the non-playing captain of the United States team. He's not a grandmaster, and the people who play on that team are all much stronger players than he is, but they like the way he handles the non-playing captain aspects, and so he does that every year. And he's an international master. And at the time of this game, I don't know if he was an international master yet, but he was considerably higher rated than I was. So I had my work cut out for me. So this is one of those openings where black can get away with playing it symmetric.
Oh, Bruce, we can't see your screen.
Fiddle-dee-dee. Once again, I have to share the screen. Sharing always was a hard point ever since I was 2 years old. Okay, so we start off with a symmetrical opening. And there are some openings where if you're playing black, you can't afford to stay symmetrical. But this is one where you can. Now there's two ways to play. There's several ways of, well, it's hard to decide how white should try to get an advantage here. One way is to play A3, and suppose black keeps symmetry with A6, then pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, B4, and bishop to B2, and in this variation, white is sort of playing it like a queen's gambit accepted with colors reversed. Okay, and so black can pull the same stunt more or less, castling and then playing pawn takes pawn and then B5 and then bishop to B7. Okay, and the position is very symmetrical, but there are some chances for both sides, and that's certainly you see that sometimes. The other way to break the symmetry, or the other way to break the symmetry, is to play what my opponent did, pawn takes pawn, and with the idea that if black retakes the way I did, he has an isolated pawn. Isn't it possible that that pawn might get weak sometime, and that white could take advantage of that? And I don't want to give away any secrets here, but there is an answer to that question, and the answer is that this is a particularly easy position for black to play the isolated queen pawn, and because of that, people will usually try a completely different method of playing against the isolated queen pawn, and I'm going to go back a ways. Most people will play here G3, so that if black plays E6, bishop G2, D5, white could consider playing pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, pawn to D4. And this is a transposition into the Tarrasch defense of the Queen's Gambit. And white has some definite strategic advantages here, whereas in the position we reach in the game with white's pawn on E3, it's just very hard for white to do anything, to play aggressively against this isolated pawn. So my opponent undoubtedly understood that, but he figured that he wanted to get out of book against his less experienced opponent, and that strategy worked for a while, as we'll see. Okay, so he plays bishop E2. Bishop to B5 is also possible here. Okay, so I'm trying to, by attacking his knight, if he captures my knight, then no more isolated queen pawn, and I'm just plain okay. In fact, I'm probably better. So he lets things sit. He keeps the tension, and I play this. Now I have annoying pressure on his queen pawn, so he plays knight A4. I'm sorry, wait a second. I have to do it this way. Okay, knight A4. Now black can play bishop G4 here, but instead I played another developing move. Now I really do have to do something about the C pawn. Okay, I'm sorry, if he had taken the C pawn on the previous move, well, for instance, he couldn't do this because knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and I win a whole bishop. Okay. And if he goes about it this way, then bishop takes bishop, knight takes bishop, knight takes pawn, and he has an ugly position with a knight, an ugly knight on B2, and I just generally have an easy game. So he didn't go for that. He correctly didn't go for that, and he played a developing move, and so I have to make a concession. Now he'd like to put his okay, so now he's got his knight and his rook both attacking C6, and the logical way for me to handle this is bishop to D7. And if he plays this, if he attacks my bishop and my B pawn, then I have time to play knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, bishop C6, and I have a solid position. So that was sort of the logical way for me to defend this position. Nothing special, just equality or near to it. But no, I decided that I was going to be the attacking genius. Rook lift to the third rank to attack his potentially exposed king. Well, that's pretty silly, but he plays an excellent move here, bishop to G4. Now it's awkward for me because my queen knight can't move because it's pinned on his rook. And he can't move his queen anywhere where it doesn't defend the rook. and he can't, and his queen is defending the rook, and it's also defending the pawn. My knight is on a decent square, but it's not going to stay there forever. And I can wiggle around with my rook, but there's nothing useful I can do. So the result of my opening experiment has already started to, is already a failure. But I'm not sure I fully grasped it at the time. The purpose of putting my queen here is so that I can move my rook to here or here, perhaps. With each move, it may not be obvious, but with each move, I'm getting more and more tangled up. And he sees this, and he sees, wow, I can trap his rook on on F5. Now, right now, he can play, or I'm threatening rook takes pawn, okay? Because if pawn takes rook, then knight takes pawn, check, forking the king and queen. And he should just calmly handle that by playing king h1, okay? But he got impatient. So he first played f4, knight e4, and now g4. And now my rook is, it looks like I'm losing a whole rook. And once again, I'm gonna pause for a few minutes. So we have someone, do we have someone raising his hand? Or is that left over from the previous game? I'm asking because I can't see the, I mean.
Yeah, there's, Will, did you have a question?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. When you played f6, why didn't you play f5? You went by that pretty fast.
Oh, all right. Let's go back there. Let's see. Oh, well, all right. I could immediately play rook f5 if that's what you're thinking.
No, just pawn f5.
Oh, well, that hangs my deep one.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. Let's see. I'll get back to. Now, you can probably see what my next move is, but if you can't, I'll let you try to guess it. So I'm hanging a whole rook. And what do you do when you're hanging a rook? Well, you hang some more material. And now I'm threatening knight f3 check. But white has like umpteen possible replies, and I'm going to cover them in order. The first one I'll talk about is bishop takes knight. Okay, so then black plays rook takes rook, and let's say white plays knight back here to guard the rook. Then black plays queen to c2, forcing his way into the position. Rook takes rook, queen takes rook check, king to g2, queen to d2 check. And if it may be that white can, well, if if white has rook takes pawn, and then pawn takes rook, queen takes bishop, bishop, and now black is just better. He has a whole pawn. He has a pawn, and he's gonna get more. So that's one alternative. Okay. Now, what about king f2 or king f1 to avoid knight f3 check? Okay, knight to c2, and now there's two alternatives. White can protect the e-pawn by queen e3. So knight g5, queen g3, knight e4. Now there's a repetition after queen e3, okay? So instead of that, what if white tries to avoid the repetition? Then another surprise move, rook h5. And if pawn takes rook, queen to h3 check. And now not queen to g2 because of knight takes e3 check. So king to e2, queen takes h5 check, king to d3, and queen to f5. And so the position gets repeated with the king going back and forth between d3, e2, and f1, and the queen going back and forth between f5, h5, and h3. So this would have been a way out. This would have been a way out. Now, the other possibility is in this position after knight to c2 is pawn takes rook, knight takes e3 check. And if, say, king to e2, then knight takes pawn, attacking the queen, and then black is still going to come down to c2 and try to mate. Or in addition, he has possibilities like b5, where the knight has no place to go. So that position is also satisfactory for black. And there's one more line which is really dangerous for black. Rook takes c7 first, allowing knight f3 check. Now if white plays king h1, then queen takes rook, queen to h3, knight to f2 check, and winning the queen and getting more than enough for the rook. But if king h1, then it gets hairy for black. I've looked at rook takes pawn, and I've looked at queen takes rook, pawn takes rook, and queen to c2, and they're all. I'm sorry, what gives here? I've got the wrong position. I'm sorry. Let me work my way back here. Rook takes rook. Knight f3 check. King to f1. Oh yeah, I have the right position. Queen takes rook. Queen to h3, and black doesn't have something really satisfactory here. White is going to win either win the rook and black can play rook takes pawn, or he can try rook, queen to c2, but neither of them is. Or wait a second, doesn't he have to move the knight first? I don't remember, but I don't remember my analysis here, but this is the fly in the ointment. So that's why this combination might not be entirely sound, but it would have been hard, but it was hard enough that Donaldson couldn't pick his way through it, so it made my day. Now let's see. So what he played was pawn takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Now I'm threatening rook takes pawn check and winning his queen. Or if he just retreats his queen, then my queen gets into the game and the extra piece doesn't count for anything. But so he played. Oh, and if he plays rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes pawn check. Now if he plays king to f1, then I play queen f5 check, and then I play rook takes queen and win. If he plays king h1, then I play queen takes rook, knight f2 check, winning the queen. And once again, I have winning material here. So instead of, let's see. So after I played rook takes f4, he had to guard his g-pawn. So I play rook f2. And he played, I'm sort of interested in playing my rook to c2 here. If he plays queen takes queen, if he gives up his queen, rook to c2 check. He plays some king move. And now how do I make progress here? I'm technically not ahead in material. A rook and knight and bishop are in some positions, they're just as good as the queen. So I have to make use of my, timing, and I can't easily get into threaten mate. So, but I can play pawn to b5, and now he can't. If he moves his knight, then I just take his bishop. So he has to give up the knight or the bishop, and so I'm okay in that position. I'm winning in that position. So he went for well, all right. In this position, after I played rook f2, he played here with the idea of trying to keep my other rook from getting to c2. So now how does black get into the white position? Well, here's the way. Queen to b8. Now he has one more sly tactic. Oh, I'm sorry. I've fallen behind here. In this position, white has one more sly tactic, and that is queen to h5. Okay. So if I play if I try to see, I want to get my queen to h2, and if I play rook takes rook, rook takes rook, queen to b8, then he plays rook to c7. So that if I play queen takes rook, then queen to e8 mate. So in order to avoid danger in that position, I have to play a little more. I have to play g5 with the idea of, and on the next move I'm going to play king to g7. If he doesn't do anything, if he just moves back and forth, I'll play king to g7, and then he can't do any, he can't wreak any havoc with his queen, and so I will continue trying to attack his king. So that didn't happen. Instead, back in this position, with my rook just moving to, he played bishop to c3, and I played queen to b8 with the idea of coming into h2. So now he really has to play queen takes rook, knight takes queen, king to f2, king takes knight. Whoops. And once again, I'm technically down on material, but I have such an initiative that I win the whole king side and then win. Okay. He plays rook e1, queen h2 check. And now I played rook to e4, and he resigned on this move because if he, well, all right, I'm threatening, you know, to get my rook into the attack and mate, or to possibly play queen h7 check, king f3, and then queen f4 check, so it's, and if he captures the rook, then I have various threats involving either getting the pawn down to the 6th and 7th rank, or forking his king and his pieces. Like for instance, knight c5 to get the knight back into the game, queen f3 check. And now if he goes king to g1, I play queen e3 check, forking the rook and king. So he would play king, sorry, oops. So he would play king e1 check, but then I play pawn to e3. And with ideas like queen f7 check and then e2 check. And he can defend. He has defensive ideas, but essentially the queen and the pawn are stronger than the rook, knight, and bishop in this position. And I should say, the rest is left as an exercise to the reader, as we say in the mathematical world. For even just capturing this pawn and then sliding this pawn down to the 8th rank is a viable plan. So that's all I have to say about the let's see, where is the actual end position here? Rook e4. Here's where the game actually ended. Okay, any questions or comments?
I forget what round was this in the tournament?
Well, it was a I believe it was a 7-round tournament. And let me think, what happened after this game? This game was in the, this was in the 5th round of a 6-round tournament. And the following round, I lost. I lost a game to a guy named Igor Ivanov. And that was the end of that tournament. Did you want to know anything else?
Oh no, I was just wondering how the tournament was going at that point. And
Well, I was not a contender for a prize at this point because I had I don't have it with me, but you know, I had already fallen back behind the field for whatever reason. But I also played a game against a guy named Kamran Shirazi, who played in the U.S. Championship a couple of times, and my last round game was against Igor Ivanov, who is also an international master, so I had quite a I had quite a run of opposition in this tournament.
still, it's a pretty dicey game.
Mm-hmm. I hope it was good for a little excitement, even if it wasn't, if the final combination wasn't terribly sound. Anybody is welcome to speak up if they want to.
Yeah, if anyone, yeah, you can type it in chat or you can raise your hand as well. That's fine as well. And then I don't know, Mel, you can try your microphone again if see if that still works.